back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about Jonathan Stroud's second book of the Lockwood and Company series, and that is The Whispering Skull. I just finished this book last night actually, and I decided that I really have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to dive right in with that. So the first thing that I would just like to say is I really did like this book. It is a really good second addition to the series. I liked it better than the first book actually, but that being said, I did have a couple of problems with it, and they weren't huge, but they were still problems. So I'm going to talk about them a little bit. The first one I have to say is this book has a mess of plots, like so many plot lines. And I had a little bit of trouble keeping them all straight because I got to one point where I was like, wait, who are these people? Who are these characters again? Why are they here? And then I was like, oh wait, they relate to this other plot that is not the main character or the main focus plot. So that to me was a little bit distracting, but I tried to not let it take away from the rest of the book because the book was very well written, and I have to say if anyone else had attempted to take that many plots and mesh them all together and weave them together, they probably would have failed miserably, but this author actually did quite a good job with it. So I have to give him kudos for that. I did really enjoy it though. But so another problem I kind of had, let me talk about the bad stuff and then I'll talk about the good stuff. Try to keep it equal. I had a problem with, in the first book, how George was treated. And I was hoping that the second book would kind of rectify that. And it really didn't, unfortunately. So let me just back up quickly in case you didn't watch the first review, which I'll link down below in case you want to see it. So the first book, and the second book, like whatever, like the main focus characters are Lucy, who she tells the stories first person, she is the narrator, and then Lockwood, who's like the boss of their little company, and then George, who's like the researcher, he does all the reading and that kind of stuff, which is like, it's a good dynamic, you know what I mean? You've got Lucy, the headstrong fighter, who's, you know, blood is boiling at everything, and then you've got Lockwood, who's like the calculated risk taker, and then you've got your George, who's kind of the goofball of the group and does all the research. So you would think that they'd all have like equal roles to play, but that really isn't how it turns out, because here's my problem. So George has been with the company for quite some time, and he's still treated like he's lesser, if that makes any sense. Like Lucy, she has been with the company for I think 7 months or something like that. She's been with them for maybe a year at this point actually, but for not as long as George. And Lockwood trusts her more than George, so I don't quite understand that dynamic there. Maybe that's just me like overthinking the whole thing, but George I always felt like got the short end of the stick, and even at the end, which I won't talk about too much because it is spoilery, but like they kind of do the corny oh my gosh, we realize how valuable you are to the team, blah blah blah. And I was like, okay, good, so at least with book 3 they'll be more, I don't know, kind to him at least. But then like at the very end, like the last couple pages of book 2, they go right back to being like the same old mean person, and I'll go into that a little bit more in the spoiler section, but like I had a problem with that. So overall, like the book, the pacing was a little bit weird too. Like sometimes you'd have like really hardcore like fight sequences, and right after another, just like boom boom boom, and you just want to keep turning the page, and then you get slammed with like 30 or 40 pages of just boring talking or exposition or whatever, and you're like, all right, okay, we get it. Can we move on now? And a lot of the stuff is explained like in the first book, and that's the issue that I have with a lot of series, and that's why I don't read a whole lot of series, unfortunately, because I know there are a lot of good ones out there, but I just can't stand reading the first book, getting all the information, and then reading the second book, and then having to redo all the information because they think you didn't read the first book. And I'm like, okay, if you have a series, please, for the love of Pete, don't feel the need to explain everyone's dynamic, everyone's relationship with everyone else, all the ghosts and the spirits and the rules of your world. Just skip all that. Assume that the reader has some form of responsibility and has read the first book, and move on. Like it's so irritating. But that's my personal pet peeve. And he does do that where he's like, oh, this is a type 1 ghost, this is a type 2 ghost, oh, and this is a type 3 ghost. And it's like, okay, with the exception of type 3 ghosts, we knew what those other ghosts were in book 1. Or they're like, this is why we use chains, and this is why I joined, Lockwood and Company, and blah, blah, blah. It's okay, we got all that backstory in book 1. We don't need to rehash it. And that's just my personal annoyance with it, where there's so much exposition in the book because they need to redo, or that he needs to like retell everything that happened in book 1 in book 2, so that way stuff in book 2 makes sense. But it would be fine if people had just read book 1. And I don't know if he's doing that because, like, I know I am reading them well after they've been released, so I can just read 1, 2, 3, and just keep going on. But some people had to read 1 and then wait like a full year or whatever until the second one came out. So maybe he's doing it that way, but I still feel like you can reread book 1. You don't have to fill up pages of book 2 and book 3 with information. So now I'm kind of dreading book 3 because I'm like, if I have to sit through 60 freaking pages of more exposition about stuff that I just read about in book 1 and 2, I'm going to lose my mind. So usually I kind of skip a little bit of that section, but whatever. It's not too bad, this book, but it's still obnoxious enough that I noticed it and I was like, just stop. But anyway, I think that's pretty much it for the spoiler-free section. Overall, I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. And I did really enjoy it. Rereadable, maybe. Maybe after a few years of not remembering what it's about, and then coming back to it and being like, I wonder if this is, something that I want to reread. But as of right now, I wouldn't pick it up immediately after. But that's not to say it's a bad book, because I don't pick up a whole lot of books immediately after finishing them anyway. I know some people can, but I really can't do that. So anyway, let's move on before this review gets too long and talk about some spoilers. So with this book, I want to talk about George a little bit, because I love George and they just walk all over him. So with the ending of the book, so he's been, I don't really know what you'd call it, but like he saw the mirror that they're all hunting for in this story, and he was like, oh my gosh, I really, I'm really interested in this mirror and blah, blah, blah. And he looked into it, and so then he got enamored with it and he had to find it. Like, it pretty much put the spell over him or whatever. And so basically it's out of his control, like whether he wants to find it or not, because like since he got sucked in by the magic of the mirror, like he wants to find it. It's basically just, I don't know, it's this big spell that just sucks you in and you can't get it out of your brain. And they didn't know that. So, I mean, well, let me make this a little more clear. So Lockwood and Lucy, they knew that he saw the mirror and they knew he was like enamored with it and whatnot, but they were acting like they didn't know or they didn't care until like the very end of the book. So like every time George would do something and he'd be like, oh my gosh, I really want to find the mirror, we should study it. And they're all like, no, are you crazy? You don't study something that dangerous, blah, blah, blah. And then they were like, oh, he's just crazy, he's stupid, he's an idiot, why does he do those things? Like he's obsessed with the research, like blah, blah, blah. And they're just bashing him. And I'm like, you realize he looked in the mirror by accident. Like he really doesn't have a choice in that moment. But then like at the end, he gets the mirror and he leaves without telling them to go to his friend, who turns out to be the bad guy, who anyone could see was the bad guy from a mile away. But anyway, he goes to this guy and he's like, I got the mirror. And the guy's like, okay, we're going to reconstruct the big bad ghost's evil plans, and we're going to make you look in the mirror and have an experiment, and we're going to see if you survive. So obviously George going to this guy in the first place was silly, because you probably shouldn't bring like a super important artifact to just some random guy. But to be fair, this was a fellow scientist. He was someone who was trusted by a lot of other authorities, and he had been kind of friends. He had been like the only person who was friendly with George the entire book. Lucy and Lockwood were giving him crap constantly over stupid things. So I don't blame him for going to someone else, like, and kind of like, being, pulled towards somebody else. Because when you're treated by crap by your friends, why not go to your enemies? You know what I'm saying? But he also didn't know he was an enemy, so there's that as well. So he goes to this guy, and Lucy and Lockwood have to come save him. They end up saving him, blah, blah, blah. Everything's great and dandy. And then they say to him at the end, they're like, we're so sorry. You know, we should have believed you. We should have, like, helped you, whatever, whatever. And I was thinking, that's awesome, because now for book 3, they'll all be, like, on the same page, and they'll be working together, and there'll be less of that conflict and crap and just making fun of George the whole time. But nope, because at the very end, Lucy's talking about how George still feels really bad for putting them in danger by going off and them having to come save him. So he's been making them all their favorite breakfast foods and like going out of his way to do things nice for them. And Lucy's like, oh, he didn't really have to do that. Like, we already forgave him, but we wouldn't let him know quite yet. And I was like, that's so mean, because like you're sitting there saying like, oh yeah, like we forgive him, but we're not going to let him know, so he keeps doing things for us. Like, isn't that kind of twisted? I don't know. Maybe that's just me overthinking the whole situation, and maybe it's just kids being kids or whatever. But I'm like, y'all are acting like adults. Like, that's the problem that I have with these books, where like they have children. I just feel like it's inconsistent, because you have these young people, like they're 13 or whatever. 13, 14, 15, I think maybe. I don't even know the ages, but quite young teenagers. And so, of course, it would make sense that they would be selfish or silly or stupid, right? Because they're kids. However, when you have them acting like adults for 95% of the book, and then the last 5% you're like, okay, they're going to act like, we just want to remind the audience that these are young people. I have a problem with that, because kids don't grow up in like halves. They don't grow up where they're super mature in like one area of their life, but then super immature in one other. It might depend with who they're around. Obviously, like some people can act more mature with their, with people that, like their coworkers or whatever, but then with their friends, they're super immature, whatever. That's fine. It's called like picking your audience and reading your audience. But kids, like throughout the books, like they act the exact same way regardless of who they're around. So these kids, it's like, okay, like why won't you just grow? Like, if you're acting so mature around everyone, just act mature to your friend. And if you're like so willing to like see the bad side, or I mean the good sides of bad ghosts, then why can't you see the good side of your friend? Like, I mean, I don't know. I just that just irritated me, because I can't stand that petty crap in real life, and then when they do it in books, I really just don't want to read about it. So I'm kind of scared for book 3, because I've heard that there's a character that I'm really not going to like in it, so I'm a little bit scared. But I'm going to read it. I'm going to power through. Maybe not right away. I might take a bit of a break, but I'll power through it eventually. But anyway, I want to talk a little bit more about this book before I sign off. So that just bugged me about George. But then there's also the aspect of like the Whispering Skull, which is like the title of the book. And the skull, while his dialogue is fun, it's not necessarily accurate. And here's the thing. People can be like, oh, well, he's been sitting in the jar for who knows how long, listening to people talk, and so he picked up on their language. But it's like, okay, look. If you take someone from England, let's say, because we're in America, and they have an accent, right? And they've lived their entire lives, like 20 years or something like that. Let's say they're a 20-year-old English person. You bring them over here, they're probably going to keep their accent, right? Like, they're not just going to switch over because suddenly they've spent a couple years around Americans and they're going to develop an American accent. They might be able to consciously switch their accent, but they're not just going to lose the accent. Excuse me, I'm tired. I almost yawned. That's the same thing with this character. He was born and raised in, I don't even know what century it was, but like centuries ago, England. And so in the flashbacks, he's talking in thee, they, thou kind of language and whatnot. And they're talking in that time period language, which is fine. That's accurate, right? But then after he dies, which you would think ghosts would get kind of stuck in that one period, right? Even if they're like type 3 ghosts, which are ones that can like communicate with the living. So why does he now talk like a freaking teenager? Because he was an adult. Like, we don't even know like how he died, but you gotta assume that he was an adult in the flashbacks. So you must assume that he must have been even older than that when he died. So he wouldn't just switch his language to, are you kidding me? You've got to be joking, guys. Like that kind of stuff. Because it's like, you wouldn't say that as a 16th century ghost. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. It's just, that kind of bugged me a little bit. But more about the skull is that he's barely in it. I mean, barely in it. I mean, he has a couple important parts, especially at the end where he like warns Lucy by like accident. They're like, we don't know if that was intentional or not. But so like you have that one moment. It's like, okay, great, fantastic. He does one good thing, you know, give him a gold star. But then throughout the rest of the book, he just makes a couple sassy comments, and that's about it. And I'm like, for a book that's called The Whispering Skull, y'all are leaving out the Whispering Skull quite a bit. It's like saying Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, but the Order of the Phoenix has about 2 seconds at the end of the book. It would make no sense. This book really should have been called like the Bickerstaff Ghost, or Bickerstaff, or how we pronounce the guy's name, but that ghost who's trying to murder everyone, or the magic mirror, or something stupid like that, because that's what the primary focus point of the book was the mirror and this other ghost. But anyway, what do I know? I'm just a simple human being sitting in a chair talking to herself about books. But anyway, my opinions on this book is it's good. It's definitely got some flaws, but at the end of the day, I did enjoy it. There's a couple like moments where I was like, but it worked out. It worked out. Some positives really quickly before I sign off is the writing style is fun. The characters are quite fun. I really did feel myself connecting with them more in this book than in the first. And the mystery was halfway decent. Like the main mystery was pretty good. I didn't mind that much. There was a couple creepy parts where I was like, ooh, shiver down my spine, but it wasn't like, again, anything too intense. But for a book about ghosts, I think it's a good thing that you have a couple like, ooh, that was kind of creepy, you know, moments. So A+ for that. I don't know, dialogue was good. But that's pretty much it. But again, if the characters are good, I can usually enjoy a book. So the characters were good, so I did enjoy the book. However, I did just have some plot issues that just, no. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this review. I hope it wasn't too long. I hope it wasn't too boring. I hope I brought up some points that maybe you guys have thought about. And if you have points that I haven't thought about, please put them in the comments below because I would love to read them. But anyway, I'm going to sign off now, but I will see you all very soon with the next book review. And I'm not even sure what I'm going to read next, but we'll see what happens. All right.